Name is Hana Brown. Since I was a little girl, I've been that trustworthy person in the family. The one they call when they need help. The one who always comes to the rescue no matter what the circumstances. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. We grew up in a home where love reigned, but material wealth was scarce. My parents worked hard. My mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet for my sister Olivia and me, and my father spent long hours at the construction site. We always had each other, and that was enough. I always had a strong bond with Olivia. She married early, and shortly after the birth of her son Oscar, life took a real tragedy for her. Her husband died. Olivia found herself alone with a little boy who was suddenly growing up too fast. I always felt obliged to help her, and from that moment on I decided to take responsibility. I began to take an active role in Oscar's life. At first it was little things. Picking him up from soccer practice, helping him with his homework, bringing him pies to cheer him up. I saw how happy he was every time I visited him, and that only strengthened my resolve to help him. As I spent more and more time with him, I noticed his ability in sports. Oscar was not only a talented soccer player, but also physically fit, tall and strong, and that inspired me. I bought him the best uniform for the soccer team. I was always there for him during training and matches. I cheered his successes, and Oscar seemed to become dependent on my support. Each of his achievements brought me joy, and I felt that the bond that had formed between us had become strong. He began to confide his fears and worries to me, and I was so pleased to be a support for him. Every game, every play at school became important events for me. I attended every parent-teacher conference, cheering his successes like no one else. Oscar knew he could come to me with any request. I was always there to listen and support. I thought in vain that this was love, that this was family, and this was how he and I coped together. But as time went on, I began to notice that the boundaries were blurring. I was realizing how my feelings for this boy were growing deeper and deeper, and it gave me mixed feelings. I couldn't ignore that I felt an affection that went beyond the simple concern of an aunt. Instinctively, something more than mere kinship arose in my heart. He became more important to me than I could have ever imagined. When I thought about my future, I felt sad that the distance between us was growing. Oscar was getting older and increasingly wanted to be independent. I knew I had to let him grow up, not hold him in my arms. But it was terribly difficult. I wanted him to always stay close, feeling the joy that his presence brought. I learned to let him go when I needed to. I realized that I may have been giving one thing, but I was taking away his ability to be independent. The moment I began to realize that love is not about holding a person back, but allowing them to be who they need to be, there was a slight relief in my heart. I wouldn't stop caring for him, but now I knew that true love was also about reasonable freedom, and finally, I took a step back, restoring balance to our relationship. This story isn't over, it's just a new phase in the lives of both of us. I hope that Oscar will one day realize that even when I was there for him, I only wanted the best for him. We have been on the same side all this time, and this is our common path that we will walk together with love and respect. It was a normal Friday, and Olivia was working late. She always worked so hard to provide for Oscar, but something went wrong that day. I felt a bad feeling and an ache in my chest, but I couldn't figure out why. When I got home, I noticed that everything was quieter than usual. Too quiet. I made my way to the couch, where Oscar was sitting with his knees pulled up to his chest. He was staring at the door, like he was waiting for his mom to come home. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to catch the mood. "She's running a little late," he replied, just staring at the door, and there wasn't a single note of worry in his voice, but something inside me told me it wasn't a simple delay. My heart pounded in unison with the growing anxiety. I tried to call Olivia, but all I heard was a dial tone. When I looked at Oscar again, he looked lost, silent. I realized I had to do something. "I'll go check it out," I said, and decided to run outside. And once I was outside, my heart beat faster with a bad feeling. When I returned a few minutes later, I saw that Oscar was still sitting where he was, but this time with a much more worried expression on his face. I sat down next to him, and in that moment, I realized that there might be no way out of this situation. A few hours later, I finally got a call, a horrible and devastating one. It was Olivia's friend. She's had an accident, Hana. She fell at work. It was just awful. A blood clot came off. Olivia is gone. Her words sounded like thunder. I soon found myself kneeling in front of Oscar when it was time to tell him the truth. Your mom is gone, I uttered, and the light in his eyes went out. Unable to hold back the tears, he just collapsed into my arms, and I could feel his fear engulfing us both. Now that Olivia was gone, a sense of responsibility swept over me. She had raised Oscar alone, and now, whether I stayed just for him or not, I couldn't let him down. I had become everything in the world to him. This was my new role, and I was ready to accept it. At first my care was simple: food, things, and a cozy place to sleep. But it soon became clear that a storm of grief had engulfed Oscar. His life ceased to make sense. Half a year had passed since that terrible loss, when one dark evening he broke his silence. His voice trembled. It's not fair. She was everything to me. Tears glistened in his eyes, and I felt I lacked the words to comfort him. I wanted to tell him that none of this was his fault, that the world could be insensitive, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. I put my arms around him and said, I'm here, Oscar. You're not alone. From that moment on, I tried to fill the void left by Olivia. I was at every soccer game, helped him with his homework, and tried to let him know he was loved. But despite my best efforts, I realized that as much as I wanted to, I couldn't be Olivia. I couldn't replace my mother, and perhaps that was what caused the tension between us. Oscar leaned on me for everything. He called me for everything, from simple questions about what to wear to school to asking for help with assignments. He even started skipping out on seeing his friends, preferring to spend time with me. When he said, "You're the only one I can talk to, Auntie," I felt it was a good thing that I was actually giving him something important, but not everyone thought it was right. My interlocutor, a cousin, told me, Oscar has to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. He's too dependent on you, and it's not good for either of you. I knew he was right, but how could I accept that this guy who had been through so much pain now had to be alone when he had me? It was a string of difficult days. I tried to find a balance between care and freedom for him, and every time I looked at Oscar, I realized that he really needed space to find himself after the tragedy. My heart burst with concern, but I knew that true love is not only about support, but also about allowing room to grow, even if it requires a lot of sacrifice. Taking the love that brought us together as my foundation, I realized, we have a new chapter ahead of us. I hope Oscar can find his way despite all the loss we've experienced. In the end, our story is not only about pain, but also about hope and recovery in difficult times. I will be by his side, teaching him how to move on, keeping the memory of our love and who we lost alive. There came a moment when I realized that Oscar had become completely different. When he turned 19, I noticed how he suddenly changed from a quiet and shy boy to a masculine and attractive young man. His voice became deep and confident, and his movements became graceful and purposeful. I watched him grow up with pride, but there was a strange sense of unease inside me as he left the familiar and safe world we had created together. At times it felt like things were changing too fast. He became less willing to laugh at my jokes, but increasingly took charge of the household chores. Every night I experienced moments of nostalgia for those times when we could just talk without distraction from the world around us. It was like a premonition of loss, which gives a special bitterness and sadness. Then one day when I got home, I found him asleep on the couch. I covered him with a blanket, as I'd done hundreds of times before, but this time, when my hand lightly touched his back, something stuck in my chest like an electric shock. I froze, my heart pounding in unison with the memory of his childhood features, the way he'd been when he'd needed my care. But that boy was gone, and a completely different man lay before me. The sight of his exposed back caused a stirring I couldn't ignore. Guilt and anxiety mixed into one ball, causing me to quickly pull my hand away. The next few days were filled with silence and unspoken words. I tried to make conversation, but it remained closed. In the evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided it was time to make a change. I invited Oscar over to watch an old movie we once loved, hoping to bring back that atmosphere of intimacy. He came over and I could feel the tension hovering in the air. Sitting next to him, I noticed how he became suddenly attentive. His eyes, so confident, sparkling, were searching mine. We exchanged light phrases, but each response seemed like an obsession. At one point I made up my mind and touched his arm, as if seeking support. He responded to that touch, and in his gaze I caught the exact moment when something changed. "What's going on, Oscar?" I asked, my voice shaking with excitement. He froze, and then, without taking his eyes off me, answered, "I don't know how to explain. I feel like things are changing, but for some reason it scares me." I squeezed his hand, and an incredible wave of understanding passed between us, a moment that dragged on for an eternity. And suddenly he moved closer to me, leaning in and his lips touching mine. It was touching and exciting, as if we were both discovering emotions that had been hidden for a long time. I didn't know what to do, but an inner voice told me it was the right thing to do. In his kiss, I felt not only tenderness, but also fear and hope. Days turned into weeks, and every night we found time to be together. Our connection deepened, turning from mere companionship to something more, something that began to take the form of love. He no longer hid in his room, but shared his thoughts, and in turn, I opened up to him, showing him my weaknesses. We discussed dreams together, shared fears, and gradually the fragile thread of trust grew stronger. I realized that this guy, who in many ways had become a stranger and a stranger, was now the closest person to me. We both struggled with change, but it was their presence that brought us closer together. Every night was full of discovery, and I learned to laugh again, feeling happiness in every look, in every touch. Oscar became not only the man of my dreams, but also a best friend with whom I could share my experiences. While he was discovering the world, I realized how important it is to allow other people into our lives, even when it brings with it risk. Together, we took on this change and, as difficult as it was, we knew that love was what would help us overcome all obstacles. And perhaps it was this difficult road that led us to something truly important.